doing either, unless it was in the schoolroom or the church. With a frown of anxiety, she continued walking and tried to dispel this sense of uselessness by concentrating on her surroundings. The village of Hairbridge Green sprawled between the farms and woodlands of East Sussex. The narrow lane running through it like a frayed grey ribbon led to the nearby market town of Hilney in the east, and the hamlet of Gorse Green to the west. Yet its isolation hadn't protected it, for it lay beneath the flight path of the enemy bombers on their way to London and the Midlands, and there were numerous reminders of that in the craters in the fields, the bullet holes scarring the walls of the Saxon church, and the shattered remains of a farmhouse and barn that had taken a direct hit. Mary again heaved the basket from one hand to the other, wishing fervently that she'd mended the puncture on her bike so this journey would have been easier. But what with one thing and another, there just hadn't been time. She trudged along past the village green, the shuttered and locked pub, the cottages, the abandoned village school and empty playground. The village didn't feel the same without the sound of children playing, but after the first 2 serious tip and runs, it had been decided to evacuate them to somewhere safer. Mary's low spirits ebbed further, for she'd always wanted to be a teacher, and she'd enjoyed helping the local schoolmistress with the little ones and getting them to sing along while she played the rather tinny upright piano. Now it was rarely used and badly out of tune, and she suspected it would remain as silent as the church bells until this war was over. She'd just begun her teacher training in September when the college in Hilney took a direct hit one night during an enemy raid. With the children gone and her teaching course brought to an abrupt end, she was feeling adrift, and although she had thought of applying for another assistant teaching post elsewhere, she suspected her youth and lack of qualifications would count against her. Of course, she could continue her interrupted studies and get her teaching certificate, but it would mean a very long bus or train journey each day to the nearest big town, which she simply couldn't afford. The thought of trying again to persuade her elderly father to help pay for accommodation in college digs was just too discouraging. He was now almost 70 and very stuck in his ways, and although her mother, for once, had supported her plea, he'd refused even to contemplate the idea when she'd approached him before, deeming it dangerous and not at all respectable for a young woman to live so far from home. Mary knew all too well that once he'd made up his mind about something, nothing could change it. She paused again to put down the heavy basket. It was all very well trying to plan ahead or dream of new horizons, but the reality of her situation meant that she'd probably be stuck here for the foreseeable future. Her father had 3 parishes under his care since the old vicar of Gorse Green had died, and he relied on her to help him with his pastoral duties now that Emmeline's health had deteriorated. And then there was the rambling great rectory to manage, a task beyond both her ageing parents, and one that even she found daunting. "Penny for them?" Mary's heart missed a beat, and she turned with a smile to face the tall, brown-haired, dark-eyed young man who strode towards her in his shabby working clothes and mud-encrusted boots.
"Jack, where did you spring from? I didn't hear you."
His eyes twinkled as he pulled off his worn cap and stuffed it into the pocket of his rather grubby corduroy trousers. "You were miles away," he replied in his soft Sussex burr. He took a step closer and looked with affection into her uplifted face before he reached for the basket. "Let me take that," he said quietly. "Looks heavy." Mary quickly glanced over her shoulder to make sure they weren't in sight of the rectory or the local gossip.
"Just for a bit, then," she replied. "If Mother sees us, there'll be trouble, and she's in a bad enough mood with me already this morning."
His expression darkened, as it always did when Mary mentioned her mother, but he made no comment, for they both knew nothing would change Emmeline Jones's puzzling, almost dismissive attitude towards her daughter. He gently took her arm. "Come on, let's get out of this wind and spend a few minutes together." She hesitated before letting him lead her across the ice-encrusted mud puddles to the 5-bar gate that opened into a field and the shelter of the thick hedgerow. Her mother disapproved of Jack and would be furious if she heard they'd been seen alone together. But Mary had loved him ever since they'd shared a desk at the village infant school, and she was willing to risk Emmeline's wrath for the pleasure of being alone with him for a few precious minutes.